All right. We're going to try this again. Last week we had a glitch in the system. It turned out to be a hardware issue, not a software issue. So, anyway, let's go ahead and do this. So, anyway, have you ever sat at, I don't know, with a gathering of folks around the kitchen table, whatever, right? And heard somebody confidently explain how, I don't know, they would fix the country if they were the president or the prime minister, right, wherever you're from, right? Or, I don't know, what the coach should have done in the fourth quarter or what the fighter should have done in the ring. Or right, we all know that guy, right? I call him the kitchen table king, right? From the safety of distance, right? With none of the pressure, none of the consequence, none of the lived experience, the answers are obvious, right? And here's the thing: we all do this, especially in the martial arts, right? Students walk in the dojo with ideas about fighting, about winning, about what really works. Sometimes it's technical, sometimes it's about weapons. I don't know. Sometimes it's something they saw in a movie. Sometimes it's something they survived once and now treat that thing as a universal truth, right? But here's the question: what happens when your assumptions collide with a lineage that has studied conflict for literally centuries, right? Further refined across generations under conditions far harsher than anything most of us will ever face, right? And that collision is where real training begins. That and more on this episode of KUDEN.
So, the big question is this: how are self-defense and success-minded people like us, concerned citizens worried about protecting ourselves, our loved ones, and the things we care about from the monsters we know exist in the world? How do we train in a way that gives us the skills, knowledge, and understanding we need without becoming paranoid fighters or killers ourselves, and yet still allows us to be the hero protector the world needs us to be? That's the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Jeffrey Miller, and welcome to KUDEN Radio. Real training for real people in a real world.
And that's still my story, for real. Anyway, here with Sensei James Alexander, as usual. And we're on episode 296. So for those of you who were on last week, we're going to do it right this time. Not that there was, like, I don't know, mistakes or anything like that. It was just one of those technical things. Anyway, James, is everything coming across okay? Can we get a sound check from folks to make sure that things aren't glitching, stalling? I see that there may be a problem on Facebook on the KUDEN page. Apparently something got deleted over on Facebook and now Restream won't send anything over there. That's okay. Hopefully folks know that they can get on my channel or over on, we gave lots of options, right? In the emails and all that stuff. So hopefully folks are on. Anyway, James, are you there? That's okay. I'll turn you on. Ta-da-da-da. No, I mean, you don't take that the wrong way. Okay. Not even a little bit. All right. As Alan would say, but it's not Tuesday. Never mind. It's not Tuesday. It's an inside dojo joke. Anyway. So is it coming across okay? Sounds okay. Yes.
Sounds good to me.
Fantastic. Other than my voice, I've got something going on.
Kyle said it's coming through. Good.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. Kyle's my IT techie. If you can't trust Kyle, who can you trust? Now that put him on the spot. I see him just like having a little moment on the other side. Anyway, I am going to jump right to things because I've got a lot to cover for this one. So I'll check back in with everybody here shortly. All right. So anyway, all right. Let's start this way, right? Most people believe that if they're learning something, well, then obviously, right, they're a student. They're watching videos, they're reading books, they're attending classes. And in the modern world, in the Western world, right, especially the Western world, right, that feels true. But in a classical tradition, that assumption can quietly and sometimes not so quietly break down. Because learning information is not the same thing as entering a path. And collecting techniques is not the same thing as being shaped by an art. I know, strange language, right? Yeah, well, gets deeper and stranger, right? So in the West, right, we're really trained to think more like researchers, right? We gather data, we compare, we interpret, right? We decide what makes sense to us, right? But a living ryu-ha, right, one of these martial lineages, and its soke and teachers, right? Ryu-ha doesn't ask you to interpret first. It doesn't ask you to make sense out of the teachings before you start to learn them. Okay? It's very different, right? It asks you to receive first, and then to observe, and then to allow your way of seeing to change before you decide what something means. Right? And that's where many people get stuck without realizing it. Not because they're lazy, not because they're not committed, right? But because no one ever taught them what it actually means in this context to be a good student, right? So during this episode, I want to explore a simple question that has very, very, very deep consequences. Okay? Are you a researcher? Are you an apprentice? Or are you somewhere in between or something altogether different? Because the answer to that question, whether we know it or not, determines where your training leads, what you become capable of, and how deeply this art, or any discipline for that matter, can transform you. Right? So, uh, before we go any further, and if you missed the pre-intro video monologue, you'll have to go back and uh, listen to it maybe later. But for those of you who are on, right, let's go back to that story, right? The kitchen table king, right? The guy that sits around and tells everybody what they would do if they were king, right? How they would fix the political spectrum and how they would make different decisions, or how they would have coached that damn team better, or how they would have done XYZ in whatever fight they just watched in the ring, and that kind of stuff, right? Um, I know I called this kind of person out, right? But the kitchen table king, as I call them, right? They're not foolish, right? He's interpreting things from a distance, no pressure, right? And sometimes only having bits and pieces of information. And in today's world, depending on your news source, how that information gets parsed out, right? But the reality is that many students approach training the exact same way, right? What I mean by that is they arrive, right? They show up to class, or they enter the dojo for the first time or the 50th time or whatever, right? With a lens that's already built. Okay? But a classical ryu, right? A lineage, again, doesn't ask you to interpret first. It asks you to what? To receive. Okay? And that's where the difference between researcher and apprentice begins. Right? So Anyway, before we continue, James, who's on? Who do we have? I'm assuming Kyle's still on because he gave us a sound check, but who else is on?
Well, we got Carl.
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 Did Carl's job hours change? I mean, I'm not complaining. Not complaining.
Kyle, Alan, Dave, Maury.
Awesome. So our regular band of ninja pirates or whatever they are. Right? All right. So let's get back to this, right? I think we'd all agree that most people believe that if they're learning something, then by definition, they're a student, right? So again, they're watching videos, they're reading books, or attending classes, right? Again, for us in the Western world, right, it seems right. It seems like that's the way it happens, right? Again, in a living view, things are reversed, right? Instead of the way it's typically done in the Western world, right? First to receive, right? In a ryu-ha, right? First you receive, then you embody, and only later do you interpret, right? And that subtle difference really determines how far you're going to go, right? So, what does it actually mean to be a good student, right? Not obedient, not perfect, not someone who memorizes techniques or collects ranks, right? Not someone who thinks they already know and tries to finish the teacher's sentences for them, right? Actually, in a dojo, when somebody does that, usually I ignore it, but if it continues to happen, James knows what I do, right? Take a couple of steps back, and I just gesture for them to take my spot, right? After all, right? If they already think they know, they don't need a teacher, right? Like, step up. There you go. Okay. What I'm pointing to, and what these lineages point to, is someone who understands the difference between learning information, regurgitating information, whether that's orally or it's physically or whatever, right? The difference between that and entering a living stream of transmission. Okay. Because many people today are learning, right? Absolutely, right? But far fewer are actually apprenticing. There's a reason I'm using that term, right? Later on, we're going to take a look at a couple of terms that very common in the Japanese language that are all referencing the student, but they're not the same. They're not interchangeable, right? But again, lots of people are learning. Far fewer are actually apprenticing, and that difference changes everything. In Issuk Sensei's book that he put out, he talks about this thing without calling it that, right? And the connection that he had with Hatsumi Sensei and just how far that went, right? But again, that difference changes everything, right? Especially with what we're trying to study, with what we're trying to learn, to understand and live, right? So again, today's question is simple. I asked it earlier. I'm going to ask it again, right? Are you a researcher, an apprentice, or something else? But using the word student, right? And sometimes it's not us, right? I mean, most of the times it's not us. The English language really fails us when it comes to areas like this. But, right, besides that question, right, are you researcher, apprentice, something different, right? More importantly, what kind of student are you choosing to become? For the longest time, I didn't give that any thought because I didn't know the difference. I didn't know I had a choice. I thought the same thing, right? There's no judgment here, right? Um, I thought the same things, right? So anyway, before we dive into that, into the meat of that, James, any questions, comments? Anybody else join in?
No, I don't see anything.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about that, right? What I'm going to call the hidden skill no one teaches. Okay, unless there's somebody on that I don't know has taken a different route. Most of us in the West grow up inside the academic model, right? We're taught that being a student means showing up, following instructions, doing assignments, learning and regurgitating information, formulas, memorizing facts, those kind of things, right? And if we're learning and we're passing the test and all that kind of stuff, right, then we assume, right, we're good students. I don't skip classes, whatever, right? I do my best. But in a classical ryu-ha tradition, the idea of a student is very different. Here, being a student isn't just about absorbing content. Okay, it's not just about learning the lessons. It's about relationship. It's about responsibility. And it's about perception. Right? Many people think they're students because they're learning techniques. Okay, I get that from a Western standpoint. I get that, right? But learning and apprenticeship are not the same thing. And that misunderstanding creates invisible obstacles that people never see. Okay? I've been talking about this kind of thing. This has been my ongoing theme since the beginning of the new year, right? Cutting the ties that bind, right? These invisible hindrances that we don't even know exist. So this is just another continuation, right? And again, this is not a judgment thing. This isn't for anybody to be like, assessing, oh, I've been doing it wrong the whole time, or no. I'm just there are lots of people. I don't know how many people on at the moment, but there are lots within the martial arts, right? That they only want to do it the traditional way. They only want to, everything's traditional. Everything's, do it the classical way, do it the traditional way, because to them that's right. But 99.8% of those folks are focusing on the kata and the skill sets and whatever, right? But there are things that we take for granted because we think we already know. Being a student's one of those things, right? So let's do this. Let's take a look at a little bit more deeply this Western lens versus the Ryu lens, like lens, right? Just how what we're looking through to see things, right? In Western thinking, a teacher shows you something or explains something to you, right? We'll stick within the martial arts because I don't want to make this so vague. A teacher shows you something, right? You practice it, you interpret it, you make it your own, right? And that works well in academic style learning. Okay. School teaches us to memorize, reproduce, and demonstrate understanding through a whole bunch, typically there's specific methods given the class, but right. For instance, I remember math classes where, and I don't know if you had ones like this or not, right? Where even if I got the answer correct, it didn't count unless I showed my work, right? I literally had to like write out every step, right? But looking back, I realized it wasn't just about solving the problem. It was about proving I used the approved formula to get the right answer. And many people bring that same mindset into martial arts. They look for the right steps. They look for the correct explanation, right? If somebody gives a different explanation, or maybe it's the same. The essential nature of the lesson is the same, or the principles and concepts behind the technique are the same, but that's not the way Billy Bob Sensei did it, or that's not the way they do it in Japan, or whatever, right? Um, they're looking for the justification that proves the technique works first, right? Often before they've even learned the moves correctly. Okay? I mean, how many people, seriously, in all honesty, have written off some of these kamae or they've adjusted or adapted them because, well, that's not the way people fight anymore. So I do this in the dojo, but on the street, I'm going to have to change things. Right? But it goes deeper than that, right? Some people write things off so much, right? In fact, many won't even bother to learn a technique unless the explanation passes their own predetermined sense of rightness. Okay. But in classical ryu-ha, right? Again, the order is different. You hear me say this a lot. First, you receive, then you embody. Only later do you interpret. Why? Right? Because early explanations are often incomplete intentionally. Right? The art isn't just teaching movement. That's where most folks trip early, because that's what it looks like. Okay? It looks like it's all about movement. It looks like it's all about techniques. But the art isn't just teaching techniques. It isn't just teaching movement, right? It's shaping perception. The past masters didn't just pass down a collection of techniques. They passed down how to see things, how to perceive, how to assess, how to look at things correctly, how to look at things that most people don't even know. Most don't know that they're important, let alone that they even exist, right? And sometimes the resistance to learning certain things isn't really about the art at all, right? Sometimes it's like the child in school asking, why do I need to learn this? Right? This doesn't make any sense. When will I ever need this stuff? Right? As though at 6 or 10 or 14 or whatever, they know how the world works, right? But it's not even that, right? They often don't ask these questions because the subject lacks any value, right? It often comes from a place because discipline focus feels limiting, when you'd rather run and explore, right? When you don't know what you'll need to know when you're grown up, or why this is important. Not for a young child, right? But for the life and problems you'll be facing when you're not a young child anymore, right? And a ryu works the same way. Okay? Structure comes first, freedom emerges later. And that there's another tripping point, right? Because structure and freedom sound like opposites. Okay. It's hard for anybody to understand looking at it, these two seeming opposites, right? How one produces the other, right? This is where many people get stuck. Again, not because they're lazy, not because they're uncommitted, but because they're trying to interpret before they've been shaped, right? Before they've been prepared for that level of lesson. Okay. In Mikyo, most people think we jump right into the mandala and all this stuff, right? But there are 4 phases to that training as well. And the first phase is called the Juhachido. Okay? Literally means 18 ways. Yeah, 18 ways. But they're 18 preparatory stages. But for the Mikyo student, there's actually a whole bunch of preparation that comes before that. Okay? Those are 18 preparatory steps or methods or whatever that you do to set things up so you can actually do the active meditation, that you can actually do the study that comes next in Mikyo. But there's a whole bunch of pre-Mikyo stuff that if it's not done, all that stuff looks like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, woo woo, who knows what, right? New age, blah, blah, blah. Okay. It's just, it makes no sense, right? So there are preparatory stages, right? Just like the school child example that I gave, right? If we let kids lead, right? If we let students determine what's important and what isn't to learn or not learn what they want, we'd have a lot more grown-ups in the world like those who that they either don't know why they can't get things done or why they feel stuck, right? Or they know why, right? And those are the folks that are regretting that they didn't do the work when they should have, right? When they were busy asking the questions, why do I have to learn this? Well, now you know. And now you either have to go back to school or you have to gain the lessons or you have to keep trying to make do with what you have. Okay. And that kind of thinking, though, in Budo, real Budo, right? That's a death sentence. And I know that seems strong, right? But this isn't about whether we'll end up being an accountant or a lawyer or a cop or we're going to end up working at McDonald's, right? Real Budo is about the difference between life and death, right? And that's where the difference between a researcher, a conventional student, and a deshi, an apprentice, begins. All right. Any questions? Any comments? Before I jump into take a look at the student side of the lens as opposed to the teacher side of the lens when we're looking at this thing here, right? But James, anything?
No, nothing yet.
I put him to sleep again, didn't I?
Could be.
All right. Yeah, well, maybe. Right. Just make sure their mics are off and they're not snoring into things. Okay, so let's talk about something here. This thing I've been pecking at and alluding to, right? This premature why, right? Why? Why do I have to learn it, right? And why is this important? Right? Whatever, right? Many people approach training with the assumption that understanding must come first, right? When would I use this? Why does it work? Is this practical? Right? Those aren't bad questions, right? And they're certainly better than like, do I have to learn this? Or even worse yet, right? Is it on the belt test? Okay. But the questions about practicality, workability, function, right? They are valid, right? Absolutely valid. But in this context, they can show up too early, right? And when they do, they shift the student from receiving to evaluating. And that's the moment the lens changes. Because instead of allowing the art to shape perception, the student begins filtering the art through what they already believe they understand. Okay? Which is exactly how other systems, right? Fighter mindsets, kata as sacred form mindsets, rigid testing cultures, hell, even their cousin's dad's best friend's Uncle Butch or whoever, right? Told them so, filter, right? These things get overlaid onto this art. Not because people are wrong, but because they're translating something different through their previous training. Okay. And this is not new. This is not new to us, right? This is not new. Hatsumi Sensei went through it. Hell, there's even a story about Takuma Sensei, right? He was spit him in the ass when he was a teenager learning the art, right? It's a story about his grandfather. He was going to teach him spear. He was going to introduce him to the spear, right? And he asked him if he knew how to cut with a sword, right? And then we've all been teenagers. We probably have teenagers, right? After giving a smug, cocky answer that yes, of course he knew that, right? Great. So grandfather has him cut at him, right? And then not only did grandfather evade the cut easily, but landed 3 sequential cuts, the training spear, right? But 3 sequential cuts before this cocky student could counter even the first one. Right? Cool story. The overt lesson, right? In actual combat. And this is an overt lesson in our lineage, right? In actual combat, every time we engage the enemy, he is cut at least 3 times, or struck, or hit, whatever. Okay, there's that damn 3 in 1 thing again, right? But there's a subtle lesson too, right? Kind of like the omote and the ura. The omote lesson, right? Every time we engage the enemy, he's cut, struck, whatever, 3 times. Sequential order, 1, 2, 3, right? Everything just lines up, bang, right? It speaks to something way more than just counter, strike, hit, whatever. Okay, because remember the attacker is not an idiot. The enemy's not an idiot. Okay, it's not that we're so good that he can't block. It's how we're doing what we're doing, right? That takes away, that makes blocking or countering or whatever a moot point. No pun intended, since I'm talking about spear, right? But the Uda side, right? That subtle lesson isn't even related to spear or sword. That subtle lesson is don't confuse your proficiency at your present level with the belief that this is all there is to learn about that technique or skill. Okay? So again, this parallels the school learning, right? The example of children asking, "Why do I need to learn this?" Right, points exactly to this same thing, right? When students are young, they don't yet know what. They don't know what they'll pursue career-wise, right? They don't even know how many freaking jobs are out there. Most books have police, nurse, construction, whatever, right? I mean, there's like this standardized thing, right? But they don't know what they'll pursue, right? So they don't know what they're going to need to know to even approach that, right? They don't know what skills will matter later, career or otherwise, right? They don't know what interests will awaken in them, right? If education waited for perfect justification, shit, learning would stall before it even started, right? And in classical training, it's similar, right? So the idea here is, again, you copy, you experience, meaning reveals itself later, right? We figure out how it all fits in. The more we learn, the more we experience. Okay. And that's a very different rhythm from institutional learning, where explanation, again, often precedes actually doing the thing. You get this long lecture, this long diatribe. There's this whole here's why it works, all that kind of stuff, right? And then you go read more about it, do the job, whatever. But it's different. I have a story I want to share with you. Right? I know I told one about Takamatsu Sensei. This one's a little bit closer to the heart because I was in a class once. Noguchi Sensei was teaching, right? So before I tell you the story, one of the ways people unintentionally warp this art is by overlaying their previous learning systems onto it, right? Already talked about that. Their beliefs, whatever, okay? Some approach it with a fighter mindset, right? So everything has to be justified immediately in terms of application, right? That wouldn't work on the street, that would work on the street, whatever, okay? Others come from kata-centric traditions, right? Where forms were sacred, never to be changed, okay? And deviation meant failure, right? So, I've told this story, I don't know, a couple of times. Had a friend once, I was invited to watch his black belt test. And he went through all these things and it looked good to me, right? And he ended up failing. And I didn't understand it. And he explained to me that, well, in this last kata that he had to do, right? It was with a partner, right? And everything was going well. And then he got toward the end and there was something, I don't know, different. That's all he could say about it. There was something different about the partner's attack that was coming in. And so he made an adjustment to deal with that and then got right back on track and finished the kata, right? But because he changed that one part, he had to retest for his black belt. I know. For a lot of us, we think that's stupid, but not in that world. Okay. But either way, both lenses can be useful at certain stages. Okay. I'm not saying these things are not ever done. Of course they are, right? At certain stages. Okay. But neither of these captures the full depth of the art. Okay? That's where this Noguchi story comes back in. I remember we're in this class, right? And after Sensei demonstrated this particular technique, I don't remember what it was anymore, right? Um, this person was asking, the student was asking, which lineage it came from, and when would that actually be used in today's world? And the Gucci Sensei, with this big old smile on his face, he just said, it doesn't matter. You can't do it anyway. Okay. Now, that student was offended. Okay. They didn't say they were, right? But you could see it in their eyes. I could see it in their eyes, right? But Noguchi Sensei's statement wasn't an insult. It was a lesson about timing, right? If you can't yet embody the movement, if you can't yet do that with your body, understanding where it came from or when to use it becomes speculation, becomes mental masturbation. It's a moot point, right? Both questions are actually pointless, right? At that moment in time. Right? But how many students want the why before they're ready to experience the how? Right? Again, it's like a child in school asking, why do I need to learn this? And the truth is, sometimes you don't know yet. You copy, you train, and later the meaning reveals itself. James, am I repeating myself? You think there's a theme here? Maybe.
Maybe. There could
Maybe.
be.
Maybe, right? Or I'm just, I popped a gasket and I'm on repeat. Anyway, right? So let's take a little bit of a deeper look at Noguchi Sensei's answer, right? And why I think it was extremely profound. Okay. When he said, it doesn't matter, you can't do it anyway, it sounds blunt on the surface. But the deeper meaning isn't dismissive, it's developmental. He wasn't saying that that student lacked ability or wouldn't need to place the technique within a given lineage forever, right? He was saying the question is premature, right? And if we continue to get things out of order, shit can take a lot longer than it needs to, than it's supposed to, right? But the reality here is that if someone can't yet embody the movement, the context of application is irrelevant because their understanding will be built on imagination rather than experience. In Mikyo, often the teacher will withhold any background around an exercise, right? Do this thing, right? Do this meditation, do this ritual practice. Why? Because I said so, right? If you're not okay with training, then, okay. But the point is that we do it, right? Then we can start to explore because there's so much hidden in the meaning or in the movement, right? Okay. But one of the reasons in Mikyo the outcome or the lesson is hidden is because if the teacher told the student what's supposed to happen, what the outcome is supposed to be, what insight they're supposed to develop, what they're supposed to gain from this, they run the risk of ego faking it. Right? So instead of learning the movement or learning the gestures or learning in martial arts, right? Instead of learning the precision of the movement and the correct angle, all that kind of stuff, without worrying about the why, other than that being the why in the moment. Why? Because you can't do it and you need to practice this until you can, right? If nothing for no other reason than better command of your own body, right? But if we start, and it doesn't matter if the teacher does it or the student thinks about it, right? If the student's focuses on like winning a fight, like I got to learn this so I can use this to win a fight, right? You can see it. Even when I tell students, stop worrying about the block, stop worrying about the counterattack, and stop worrying about the end of the attack, do this freaking movement as is. Some still can't because they're still driven by fighter mindset, by the reason that they're learning. No, the reason that you're learning at this stage right here is to get the fucking movement right. Excuse my language. Right? So, but anyway, right? Ego has the reins, and then its conceptualization, most people know it as imagination, right? Leads instead of experience, right? But this is the classical Budo teaching method. Not withholding knowledge, but protecting the student from misunderstanding it too early. Right? Sometimes resistance isn't about meaning. Sometimes it's about effort. Right? And again, we go back to that school-age child analogy for a moment. Something else becomes really clear. Right? Very often, the resistance about learning a given lesson isn't really about the subject at all. It's not that the child hates math or English or history or science or whatever, right? It's that the child wants to run around. They want to explore. They want to play, right? They want to do what feels interesting in the moment, which is going to change in another moment, but either way, right? But the school curriculum, just like in a classical ryu-ha, right? It demands something different. It demands disciplined focus. It demands repetition. You know, we were taught that ugly word that everybody came to hate, homework. Why do I have so much homework? Well, because you have so many different subjects you're learning, right? But like, I'm gonna come home. I just did 20 of these math problems in class, and now I got this worksheet I have to do with like 20 more. What's up with that? It's practice. It's repetition. Right? It's to reinforce the lesson between today and tomorrow's class. So tomorrow we can work on the next thing and not the same damn thing because we didn't practice. And now we forgot. It's no different than a teacher correcting the same mistakes over and over again. Okay? The point is staying with something long enough for it to change you. But let's face it, that's uncomfortable. Right? But that's ego, not wisdom. Right? So what ends up happening is the mind looks for a justification to escape the work. Right? Even if we don't think that that's what we're doing. Right? Why do I need this? When would I ever use this? Is this really practical? Right? Nobody in today's world fights like this. Why can't I do it my way? Right? Those questions they're often not about understanding, right? They're about resistance to effort. Same pattern shows up in the martial arts. Right? The moment training demands patience, restraint, and repetition, the student mind looks for a reason to reinterpret, to modify, or dismiss what's being taught. Not because the art's wrong, but because discipline feels limiting before it feels liberating. But the real difference is that a researcher follows curiosity wherever it leads. An apprentice stays with the work long enough to be transformed by it. That distinction explains why so many people stall at technique or argue philosophy prematurely or feel that the art just doesn't work, right? Or won't work. People don't do it that way anymore. When in reality, they simply haven't stayed inside the discipline long enough for perception to change. So how does this connect to ryu-ha specifically? Okay, because a ryu-ha doesn't exist to entertain curiosity. I mean, it may look that way in modern times because everybody and their brothers running around trying to invent their own, right? But ryu-ha, they weren't invented to entertain curiosity, right? Martial arts training was not an option. It wasn't something that the idly curious could sign up for, right? These ryu-ha exist to shape the student to be able to do very specific things well. And that shaping requires structure before freedom. It requires imitation before expression. It requires discipline before adaptability. Yeah? This is why, it's exactly why, early on, the art can feel, when we're doing it right, when we're doing it based on, the traditional way, it's why the art can feel restrictive, even boring, to someone expecting constant novelty or immediate payoff. And that's not a flaw. That's the gate. Okay? That's the gate. Anyway, before I forget, and I glare at myself in the mirror because I forgot again, don't forget, if you're getting some value out of these things, getting the value out of this episode or the series in general, right? Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, right? You subtly program the algorithms on whatever platform you're on to share this stuff with other people. Anyway, another thing that gets in the way, that can get in the way, right, for some, right, of becoming a true student, in this context, right, a good student, right, is what I call the want the ability now syndrome, or want the ability now mentality. Right? I don't know if this is uniquely Western, or if it's just a human thing, right? But I see it all the time, right? And yeah, full disclosure, guilty as charged way back in the day. Okay. But this is where a student looks at the teacher, how they move, how effortlessly they respond to things, right? And the desire becomes what? I want to be like that. And that's normal. It's natural. But that's not the problem. The problem comes when the student wants the outcome without embracing the process that created it. They want any and every shortcut that will get them there without having to do the stuff that the teacher, right? They want to move like the teacher, but not necessarily walk the same road the teacher tripped over to get where they are. They want the same insight, but not the years of confusion that shaped it. They want the freedom without first living inside the discipline that it took to get there. So instead of copying the path, they try to copy the appearance. And that's where things start to distort. Because what you're seeing in a teacher, right, isn't a collection of techniques. It's the result of thousands of hours of repetition, of failure, correction, and subtle refinement. Right? You can't jump straight to being like the teacher. You become like the teacher by becoming deeply yourself through the work. One of the biggest jokes in the Bujinkan from the earliest days, right? People would say, man, I want to be just like Sensei. I want to be just like Hatsumi Sensei. And like the senior teachers would laugh and go, you'll never be like Sensei. And again, there's that indignation, right? What are you talking about? I'm serious and I'm all in. And no, you can't be like Sensei. Sensei, he's one of a kind. Okay? You can be the best you can be, just like he's the best he can be. Right? Stop trying to be him. Right? And here's an example of where these things can collide, or where the students need to understand first before action, right? How that paradigm gets in their way, right? I've done this online and I've done it in the dojo. Well, where I'll often ask students a simple question after a technique, or I'll freeze in the middle of one and ask, why is my arm in that position? In that technique, at that point, why is my arm right there? Right? And their answer tells me everything about their lens, tells me everything about where they're looking. Right? Someone might say, it's for kamae. I hope, I haven't heard this in a long time, but I hope I never hear, because that's our style. Because that's big old Coke bottle glasses for those old enough to know what I'm talking about, right? But again, somebody might say it's for kamae, or they might say it makes blocking easier from right there, or it protects the center line. All correct. And all incomplete. because the same arm in the same position could be structural, it could be tactical, it could be survival based, or it could be strategic, right? Like Kyuji's Tenkan, disguising truth and falsehood, right? It could be there so as to influence the opponent's perceptions and decisions in what they'll do next. Same technique, different lens, different future capability. Okay? A researcher looks for the right answer. A true student allows the meaning to evolve over time and knows that there is no fixed answer, that arm is in that position for any number of reasons. What do I need it for against this guy in this moment? Okay. And again, this can show up at any level. This isn't just about beginners, right? So we black belts are not off the hook either. Okay. Not by a long shot. Okay. Because this shows up very clearly when someone reaches a certain level. Okay? And as a for instance, right? I recently worked with a Shodan in my dojo, right? Shodan moving toward Nidan, right? Solid student, good attitude, capable guy, right? I'm leaving off great guy, funny guy, because that has nothing to do with skill, right? But great attitude, wants to learn, like all in, right? I gave him a very simple task. Not a variation, not a choice, not a what would you do here? Just do this one thing. Okay. And every time, like now I'm Hizuke, right? So every time I did my thing, instead of doing that one thing, he did something else. Not because he didn't know the movement, but because he knew too many. I know, right? Okay. He kept defaulting to other blocks, other counters, other solutions. Right? And I finally had to stop him and say, I know you know a lot of techniques. I want you to do this one. So we both know that you know it. We both know that you can do it correctly. Right? And that moment reveals something really important. At certain stages, more techniques don't create more skill. They create interference. Okay? Because the problem wasn't lack of ability. Right? This guy has ability. Right? The problem was inability to stay inside the model because that was what was required. What was required was restraint, control, right? And precision. Not adaptability. Not win the fight. Not, okay? So this is where having too many techniques can become the opposite problem. The student stops embodying and starts selecting. Right? And selection happens after understanding. Its correct place is after understanding, not before it. Because selecting a skill comes from discernment about a problem and any particular skill's appropriateness to control an outcome. Not just because you can do it. Right? Just because Hatsumi Sensei or any of the teachers has stopped at different points in techniques they were demonstrating, right? And said, you could do this, or you could do this, or this, whatever, right? Doesn't mean you're free to because of preference, but because you need to be free or able to based on the situation. They're trying to show options in a moment. But if we jump ahead, right? Teacher shows all these, write them down in our notes, whatever. And every time where you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, right? But we don't practice. We don't go back and practice to do any one of those things consistently enough to get it not only into muscle memory, but perception, recognition, and work it often enough to find out when it fails, under what condition it fails, or when it's a shitty option. Everything stays in, well, you could do that. Well, yeah. You could hold your breath for 20 minutes. Well, no, you can't, but you get the idea, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And this brings up something else that both trained and untrained people walk in with: personal preference. This isn't the same. It can sound like it's the same as I'm overlaying, another fight system or another martial system or what I saw in last ESPN MMA fight or whatever, right? But it's not. Right? Sometimes it comes from previous systems, right? The old way of doing things that seem familiar, right? Other times it comes from movies or what someone thinks a fight is supposed to look like, right? But personal preference is where we've seen all these things and we like that one. Or we like that one. That one's cool. Or, ooh, that's a tricky little thing. Ooh, right? It makes us smile, right? So instead of doing what's being taught, like uke-nagash, right? They default to a big karate style block and ask, well, couldn't I just do it this way instead? Right? I mean, it looks close, right? And on the surface, it sounds like a reasonable question. But here's the problem. Again, preference often arrives before understanding. The student is choosing based on what feels right, or what they like, or what they think is cool, not on what the art is actually trying to develop, not the lessons within the lesson that looks like the movement. Right? Remember the first time you learned that uke-nagash wasn't about blocking? It was more about having your limb be like an insect's antenna, whether you're gathering information about that person, lines of force, pressure, strength, stability, balance, right? All those kind of things, right? In that one point of contact. Right? And all of a sudden, blocking seemed caveman-like. Okay. Couldn't I just do it this way instead? Yeah. Sure. You're a grown-up. You can do whatever you want. Okay. But again, just like ryu-ha were not developed, right, for entertainment purposes, right? Ryu-ha also doesn't exist to validate preference. Again, I sound like I'm repeating myself. At least I sound like that to me, right? Ryu-ha exists to reshape perception. Okay? And early in training, especially when learning a new kata or even being introduced to a new lineage, copying without editing is part of the discipline. Right? Not because creativity is wrong, but because freedom without foundation turns into distortion. And again, this is where the difference between researcher and apprentice becomes much more obvious. Speaking of apprentices, just a quick reminder that we are going to Japan this May. Again, some of you guys already know this, and I know I promised the page to be done this past weekend. It's almost done. I promise. It's almost done. Right? I'll be finishing it up late tonight. Okay. there's only 8 spots. I only take 8 people max with me, right? And as of today, as of tonight's class, 4 of those spots are already spoken for. Okay, so you want to be one of those going, or just want to get information about the trip, right? Stay tuned. Emails will be going out and social posting, so people can go over to the page and take a look at things. But either way, that's my little segue. James, any questions or comments pop up while I was just rambling on there about stuff people already know about?
No.
I'm being facetious. Or is it fastidious? It's facetious. Anyway. All right. So again, we're back on this again, right? This researcher versus apprentice, right? So let me be clear, right? You absolutely can learn from videos, from books, from online programs. I do. I have, and I will continue to do so. Right? That's why I put them out. Right? This isn't something new, right? Maybe don't share this episode with the crowd that you can only learn it in the dojo, whatever, right? Online programs don't work, whatever. Okay, because they're not going to like this next part. Remember when I said this isn't something new? It's okay. Did it too. Hatsumi Sensei did it too. There were no videos in his. Yeah, no shit. Okay, I got that part. Okay. But just in case there are some you can only learn in the dojo listeners out there, yes, he trained directly with Takuma Sensei. Yes. But between training sessions, Takuma Sensei sent him home with written material, books, letters, things to study and reflect on. But just in case you caught or you missed the Takamatsu Sensei, the commemorative video that Hatsumi Sensei put out that had just snippets of the hours upon hours of film that he or his wife shot while he was with Takamatsu Sensei practicing, right? Literally hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours, right? Good thing he was a doctor, right? This was on, everything was on like 8mm, right? If you know anything about the old days, right? There was at best 3 minutes worth of film that could fit in those devices. I know, I had one. Anyway, but he shot hours upon hours of film and then had it processed so he could watch it again and again and again to get the movements right when he wasn't with Takuma Sensei. So self-study has always been a part of the path, right? And if we're honest, right, even those who cry poor, right, we all have access to this kind of material. Okay, it's the way the world works today, right? Hatsumi Sensei has written how many books, right? Produced how many videos, right? There are seminars, recordings of seminars, all that kind of stuff, right? Material shared over decades from Hombu, from Taikai, from Daikomyo side, and other settings, right? The medium has changed. The responsibility of the student has not. But here's a cool thing, right? I was taught to approach these materials in a very specific way. To read them or watch them, this is important, as though Sensei wrote them for me, as though he was speaking directly to me. Was he? No. He put them out for everybody to read. Put them out to make some money too, right? But he put them out for people to learn from. But It's in the way we engage with them, right? I was taught to treat the books and videos as if they were scrolls, with the same reverence and respect we would treat them with if they were actually scrolls. What are scrolls? Scrolls are the way that teachers, the past masters, transmitted the art in written form. And I believe that they had video or 8mm or whatever way back, they would have used those. So we're idolizing scrolls as something special because that's how the art was transmitted traditionally. But books and videos are the way they're transmitted now. Okay? Just because the technology of today creates something that looks very different from a classical densho doesn't mean it's not the same. Right? The function can still be similar, if not the same, right? If the student approaches these things with this same mindset. So when you read a passage in a book or you watch a video, ask yourself, how am I reading or watching this? This is crucial. Right? Also ask, what level of training is this? Right? Is this Taiden? Right? Step-by-step instruction, Taiden, right? Transmission through the body, right? Is this step-by-step instruction? Is it technique demonstration, right? Movement meant to be copied and practiced? Or is something deeper being transmitted? Because many seminar videos aren't just showing techniques, right? There's KUDEN in there, right? There's feeling, there's timing, there's perception being expressed between the movements. And if you only watch for technique, if you only watch the moves, you miss the scroll hidden inside the movement, inside the moment. Right? And then on top of that, there's Hatsumi Sensei's explanations, discussions, questions. Right? If you've ever watched any of these things like Taikai videos or whatever, right? The ones that have been pirated and put all over YouTube, right? Every once in a while, Hatsumi Sensei will turn to somebody and ask them a question about something. Or he'll make a comment about something. These are important too. We'll talk about that here in a bit. Okay? But information alone doesn't create apprenticeship. Relationship, reflection, and time do. Okay? Just like there's different types of friendships. Okay? Somebody can be a friend from work, but that's where it stays. Somebody can be a friend from the club you joined or from the dojo, but that's where it stays. Right? But time, relationship, sharing, bonding, a whole bunch of things, right? That changes the nature. Okay? Again, a researcher gathers material. An apprentice allows that material to change how they see themselves, how they see others, how they see the world, how they see the connection between them, how they see interactions. But again, learning information doesn't automatically make someone an apprentice either. Information creates researchers. Relationship creates deshi. And this would be a good place to discuss this word student. But before I do that, James, questions, comments? Anybody wake up?
They haven't said anything.
Okay. You can see the numbers and stuff, right? Do we have actually people that are signed in?
Hmm.
Okay. All right. So in Japanese, there are several words that translate as student, but they all point to something different. Not just in relationship to what and where someone is studying, but how and why as well. Okay. Well, we're going to look at three. Okay. I'll split one out here in a bit, but we're going to look at three, right? There's gakusei, seito, and deshi. I've been using this deshi term, but so gakusei, seito, and deshi. Okay. Gakusei, like sensei, right? Sensei, uh, literally one who was born before or one who was gone or come before me, right? Gakusei, one who was come after, one who was born later, one who was younger, that kind of thing, right? One who follows. Okay. So gakusei is a very generic, general term in Japanese, but it's still specific. It refers to an academic student, a student who's actually in school, an academic school. Okay? Seito, this is a word that shows up in modern martial arts dojo sometimes. Right? Seito, Seito, Teo. Sorry, my Japanese English just squished together. Seito, Seito, right? Refers to someone receiving instruction, right? A learner in a class or a lesson. But it doesn't have to be school, right? It could be an adult learning class. It could be uh, bonsai trees, whatever, even though they have traditions and whatnot too. So, but somebody's receiving instruction, um, lessons, classes from somebody or whatever, right? But they're not an academic student. Like years ago when I hired Japanese native Japanese speakers as tutors to help me learn Japanese, right? Um, I would have been seito, okay, that kind of student, right? But deshi implies something deeper. There is a relational, immersive connection within transmission. Right? Many people train as seito their entire lives. Okay? And that's not wrong. But becoming deshi is different. Okay? It's not just more effort. Often, if you look up the word deshi, you'll see references all over the place, right? Where I've even seen one where um, the big difference between seito and deshi is like the seito, they both show up for classes and all that, but the deshi, right, they stay afterwards, they help around the dojo and that kind of thing, right? Deshi is not just more effort, okay? It's not just helping around the dojo or doing things like Ishizuka Sensei did for Hatsumi Sensei, right? In organizing things, in promoting the dojo, helping to manage things, those kind of things, right? It can include those, but it's that's still very very limiting, right? Being a deshi is not just doing more for your teacher or the dojo or the art, right? It's a shift in responsibility and perception altogether, right? And and I wanted to validate that distinction clearly because if students go searching online, right, again, you will see Seito translated as martial arts student or anyone learning anything, right, outside of an academic school, adult education, cultural, language classes, whatever, right? As a matter of fact, we go to Japan. If I can hook up with my friend, I normally try to have the group stay at this guest house that he runs, but even if we can't, um, I don't know if he's still doing it post COVID and all that, but he ran a cultural learning group where these Japanese folks signed up, right, to meet, I think once a month, something like that, right, to learn English. He used to live in the States and worked here, went to school, that kind of thing, right, and speaks fairly fluent English. And so they're not going to one of these formal English language schools and whatnot, but they meet but they're not just studying English, they're also studying Western culture as well. Like they might study something that's uniquely American or uniquely English or Irish or Australian or whatever, right? Um, and the rule they have in that club is when they show up for the club, there's no speaking Japanese. They have to speak English. And the reason I know about these is because very often, if I and my group are in Japan during the time when this meeting pops up, he invites us to come to the meeting. And so we get to, as much as we would like to learn Japanese while we're there, we're basically interactive partners. And they impress us with all kinds of things and, that kind of thing. But, dinners supplied and all that kind of, it's just a cool little interaction kind of thing. But again, Seito, right? That's its usage, right? And it's true, right? Seito, right? But the difference isn't different dictionary definition. It's depth of relationship. Okay. A Seito learns lessons. A Deshi is shaped by the path. Yeah, but isn't a Deshi learning lessons too? Yeah, they are. But it's what they take away. It's why they're engaging. Most students go to martial arts classes to learn martial arts techniques. A Deshi they're trying to transform themselves. Right? This isn't about playing warrior and things like that. Right? They're letting themselves be shaped by this because the techniques weren't just the only thing that were passed on, right? The way the techniques are and all that themselves are shaped by the way these people thought about things, the way they look at things, right? Their own experiences and watching friends die and whatever. But we can't forget also that a warrior engages with life as well. It's not all about the battlefield. Okay. I'll talk about the teacher's role here in just a bit, but just a quick note here about deshi, right? Deshi are split. There's two types of deshi. It's uchi deshi and soto deshi. Okay. Uchi deshi are live-in students. They live in or extremely close to. It could be right next door or something, a room attached to the teacher's house or dojo or whatever, right? But they're there, right? They clean, they work, they contribute, whatever. I mean, pretty like anybody else who lived in the same house, right? But what they do is they take over responsibilities so the teacher can focus more on even deeper study. Okay, so uchi deshi, right? Soto deshi. So uchi, right? Uchi means inside. Okay, not strike. It's not punch, right? So uchi is inside. So uchi deshi, inside apprentice or inside student. Okay. Soto deshi. Soto means outside, like o soto. Okay. O big, sometimes great. Soto, outside or outer. Nage, Osoto Nage, right? If you're in Mod 3 in my curriculum, Osoto Nage is one of your primary throws. Often we'll call it a rear hip throw or a rear throw or something like that, right? But Osoto doesn't mean rear. It means big outer or big outside, right? So anyway, but a Soto Deshi lives outside, right? So they could live in the neighborhood. They could live across town. They could live like Hatsumi Sensei. Hatsumi Sensei was a Soto Deshi. Okay. He lived hours away. Okay. By car, 6 or 8 hour drive. Okay. By rapid trains back then, might cut it down to 2 or 3 hours. Okay. But he took train travel. So he'd close up the clinic at night, hop on the train, sleep on the train overnight, get to where Takuma Sensei lived earlier in the morning. And then would stay the weekend, finish training Sunday, get on the train, sleep overnight, get back to the clinic, get himself all cleaned up and all that, open up for the patients Monday morning. Okay. Sensei, I don't have anybody, that's teaching near me and stuff. I can't travel for training. Oh, okay. Well, must be better than the Grandmaster of the Art. Anyway, yes, I'm being facetious. All right. So, Soto Deshi, in today's world, we live across the ocean. We live in other countries. But there's no difference between the two. Yes, the Uchideshi lives with the teacher. And they're doing lots of things, right? There's certain day-to-day responsibilities. But when it comes to commitment, when it comes to depth of like the immersion into things, there's no difference. Okay, Uchideshi and Soto Deshi, same. All that's different is location, proximity. Okay, the key word here is deshi. Okay, so let's take a look at. Let's flip the lens here, right? From the very beginning, I was told something else that changed how I approach training, and that is that the teacher is always teaching. Okay? And I think this is also a big differentiator between a seto and a deshi. The seto shows up to learn the moves, to learn the lessons, right? The prescribed lessons, right? I signed up for this. This is what I'm paying for. You teach me this. Awesome. I go home. Okay. The deshi knows the teacher is always teaching, not just during technique demonstrations or official class time. Okay. Anytime we're around them. Okay. Because this is part of that becoming. Okay? This is also what makes being a teacher a burden and not a badge of honor. Okay. Everything matters. Nothing doesn't matter. How they walk, how they greet people, how they pause, how they handle pressure, everything is instruction. Okay? This is what transitions the way we think about them from or between two other terms, from sensei, teacher, to shiso. Okay? Shiso, Shiso, a long bar, or OU, depending on the writing system you use for Romaji. Okay. Sensei, teacher. No, not just a martial arts teacher. Okay. That's another one of those myths. Okay. The word sensei means teacher, and they can be a teacher of gakusei, right? School students. They can be the teacher of seto. Anybody's teaching anything, sensei. Okay. As a matter of fact, sensei is also used as an honorific when we're referencing anybody. Let's say there's a lawyer that's really, really good at his craft, or an accountant or whatever, and some up and comer is trying to, be the best they can be. And somebody will say, oh, Yamamoto sensei, can really learn from him. Not Yamamoto-san, not Yamamoto-sama, right? Yamamoto sensei. Okay. Well, does he teach you the university? That's the first thing we would think. Nope. I mean, does he teach at some online law school? Nope. Sensei in this case is an honorific. Somebody who's so good at what they do, you can learn from them. So sensei is not reserved for we in the martial arts. Okay. But neither is shiso. Shiso is a teacher of life. That's how I've referred to Hatsumi Sensei ever since I learned the word 2 decades ago. As a matter of fact, once I got a gift for being in one of my students' weddings. It's just a metal business card holder kind of thing, right? And it wasn't the gift. It was the fact that they had it engraved with shiso instead of sensei or my name or whatever. Okay. And I got this from a native Japanese speaker, so this is not me catching on to something or somebody said something or whatever, right? I was actually I was needing to write a letter to sensei, and normally I had written these things and then had somebody within the art translate things for me, send it over and whatnot. And I thought, I'm learning Japanese and everything. This would be a perfect opportunity for me to do this myself, right? And so she said, "Yeah, just write out the letter, and then we'll use it as a lesson thing as well." Okay, cool, right? So, I bring this thing in, and dear sensei, right? First lesson I learned was they don't use dear at the beginning of anything. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so sensei, because we had discussion. Now we just didn't have discussions about these things. She would actually come to my dojo because my schedule has always been very, very tight. So she would come to my dojo, and I would be finishing up a class or something like that, and then somebody else would be doing a class in another room or whatever, and we'd use this other classroom for this 45-minute hour tutoring session. And so between our conversations and her listening in as I was teaching students things and sharing the lessons, she said, "I don't think sensei is the right word." And I said, no, it's sensei. And she goes, I know what sensei. I know sensei. But I hear you teach, and I hear you describing what Hatsumi Sensei has taught you. And you've told me things, learning in Japan. And I think a better word is shiso, because he teaches you more than just martial arts. He teaches you life and perspective and these things, right? Yes, shiso. I think so. Shiso is a much better word, and he will understand it. I said, but everybody is using what they've been told to use or heard to use or whatever. So in everyday conversation, it also sounds like the master teachers are also very humble as well. Hatsumi Sensei is called junior students that he saw with potential. He calls them sensei. Shirai Sensei picked up on the same habit, calls every student in class sensei. Yeah, it's future pacing, right? But shiso, right? And that goes from a conveyor of information to be learned to a mentor of life and living more purposefully, more deliberately, more powerfully. Right? Again, this is something I experienced deeply with Jikai Sensei as well. Right? Not just learning Mikyo, right? But immersion within the teachings themselves. Because we didn't just sit around and go through lessons, right? We had discussions. Right? He told personal stories and shared his opinions about things going on in the world. Right? It even corrected me when I was being vague. Right? He told me stories, shared lessons about Reverend Jion Haba, his own teacher, right, from Tokyo. Right? That kind of relationship isn't about status. It's not just about the meat of the lessons, the step-by-step, the how-to, right? It's about proximity to perception, is mind to mind. And that's what many people miss when they approach training only as academic learning. But again, a lot of people aren't teaching this. Okay, you can't get depth if you haven't been primed. If that depth hasn't been at least hinted at or exposed, right? And that really points to what a teacher actually does in this context. Again, everything I'm uncovering is about in this context. I'm not splitting hairs. A teacher could do this. A teacher could do, yeah. In this context, classical ryu-ha, in this context, right? Anyone can show you a movement, right? Anybody can teach you a technique. But a lineage teacher does something different. They decide when you're ready for a deeper layer, what lens you're currently using, and how to guide you without explaining everything outright. Because there's a huge difference between somebody giving you an answer and you discovering that truth for yourself. The difference is huge. The difference is profound. Right? This is why two people can demonstrate the same kata. Right? Two teachers can demonstrate the same kata and yet produce completely different students over time. I'm sorry, but I've seen it. Right? Groups show up, come, go, overlap with our trips and whatnot. You got groups that are, exhausted from all the physical training, or, they're discussing things on a regular basis, and other ones, as soon as class is over, they're going out to get shit-faced at a local bar. Yeah, teacher too. Okay. So a teacher in this context isn't just transferring knowledge. They're shaping direction. Okay. This kind of teacher is not showing you what to do. They're shaping how you perceive, how you look at things, how you understand cause and consequence. Right? And Hatsumi Sensei, he's had so many different ways of teaching. Right? What I've learned about teaching, and the nuances to it. Right? Here's an example of this subtle form of teaching. Right? Hatsumi Sensei used to do something during Taikai seminars and those kind of things. Right? Like typically it was a Saturday night. There'd be testing for Godan, for the fifth dan test. Right? And this would be in a closed room, closed area. Everybody else is off doing whatever, right? And afterwards, right, those who passed, okay, the next morning, he would have them all come up on stage or to the central teaching area. Everybody's in, and we're waiting to get started and whatnot. He would call them up. If you find any of these old videos, old Taikai videos, maybe late 80s into the 90s, early aughts. Sometimes they're there. Sometimes they're on there. Other times they're not, but very often they're there. And he would have these newly promoted Shidoshi demonstrate something. Could be something they learned over the weekend. Could just be whatever, right? And then afterwards, after everybody went through and they were back lined up again, right? He would then turn to the audience and say, he would say different things, but the effect was the same. And the one I'm thinking of at the moment, right? It was kind of poetic. He would say, like stars in the sky, right? Some brighter, some dimmer. Here are your stars. Which star will you steer your ship by? And that wasn't about ranking or judging people. It was about responsibility. Ours, right? The students trying to learn, even within the same art, expressions vary. The student chooses his or her direction, and one of those choices is in the teacher. Okay, and this leads to another one of those invisible factors that create who we become. Proximity. I talked about this with the deshi, right? Uchi deshi, living in or next door to the teacher. Soto deshi, outside, across town, towns over, halfway across the planet, whatever, right? But here's another reality that most people never consider. Many students don't choose a path based on philosophy or depth. They don't. They choose based on proximity. They choose based on ease, on comfort, right? The dojo was closer. The schedule fit better. Someone they knew trained there. And that's not wrong, but it does shape perception. Convenience often becomes identity without conscious choice. And then we end up defending it to the death like it was the best choice ever. And that's why discernment matters. Before I talk about something else, there's this other thing, right? Why we were told to train with other teachers. James, questions, comments? I know I keep interrupting things here, but just see where we are.
No questions. Dave and Alan confirmed that they are still awake and listening now.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks. I appreciate it. Alan sits in that comfy chair, man, and you never know. Alan, you cannot take that chair to Japan, all right? It's not happening. He thinks he wants to go. We'll see. Anyway. All right. So we were encouraged to train with multiple instructors, not to become Ronin, right? Masterless samurai, right? Not because you couldn't or shouldn't have one personal teacher. You should. Okay. This too, right, is a lineage thing. Matsumi Sensei explained that very clearly. As a matter of fact, it was at the Princeton Taikai, right? That you should get lessons from different teachers and all that up to a certain level. But at that level, you had to choose one teacher to guide, right? And again, it often came down to just it's a lineage thing, right? Same thing in Mikyo, right? Get influences from all over the place and whatnot, but ultimately you have to choose one because of the subtleness and the transmission. And again, it's a lineage thing, right? Student of a teacher who themselves was a student of a teacher who themselves, that's what keeps it pure. Okay. So it's very difficult. It's a Western idea that because people, they'll get a degree from this college and then another degree from that college, and perfectly fine. Okay. But that whole idea of being, right, if we're going to be traditional, if we're going to split hairs on being traditional, only doing things the traditional way, yeah, well, so again, it's not because you can't do these things, right? It's again to expand perception. Okay, train with other teachers to expand perception. Okay, I personally had several through the years. Every time I went to Japan, right? that I made sure that I trained with. Right? I say had because a few have passed away. It's the nature of life. I'm 63 years old. Long since have my heroes, right, have been dying. But anyway, so I had several. Why? Well, because one teacher expressed the art through self-protection. That was all the references. Another through philosophy. Another through precision. Another through adaptive Budo. And still another primarily from balance, control, and braking. Right? His and yours. Same art, different lenses, different feel. Right? And when you experience enough expressions, you begin to see what remains constant underneath. Right? And that's where real understanding begins. Okay? For me, one of the things that began to change over time was how I saw the different lineages. Early on, they felt like collections of techniques, right? Different kata, different movements, different structures. But as my understanding deepened, something shifted. And I started to see them less as techniques and more as answers to different kinds of problems. Right? Tagagi Yoshin began to feel like the answer to tight spaces, close quarters, confined movement, tighter clothing, right? Situations where structure and proximity mattered more than speed, right? Kotoryu carried a very different feeling, right? Decisive disruption, the kind of movement that ends things quickly or creates the opening you need to access a weapon or escape, those kind of things. And Togakureryu, right? That one revealed itself in movements and moments where the conflict wasn't purely physical, right? Where perception, timing, and influence mattered more than impact. Right? No teacher ever sat me down and explained these things directly. Things were hinted at, right? But those insights arose over time as the art itself began to make more and more sense, became less of something that I did, and became more and more a part of who I was and how I processed my world. And that's an important distinction. Right? The deeper lessons weren't hidden in the techniques. The techniques were reflections of those lessons in motion, but in a certain realm, right? Against physical violence. But what about in an argument? What about in a car crash? Car slid on ice one time, went right off a cliff. There was no human being to fight. However, there was cold to neutralize, to not freeze. There was snow to reach through, to grab roots, to climb up this thing. There was disguise and impersonation skills to feign injury that caused somebody who, at first glance, was extremely suspicious and wanted to get the hell away from me, right? To stop. There were communication skills that convinced them to let me ride in the cab of the truck and not with the dead deer in the back, to take me back to a hunting cabin. Again, this is dead of winter. My coat was left in the car because I had to get the fuck out. Right? Had to do with pre-planning escape routes from something that may never happen. And did. Right? But again, these lessons weren't hidden in techniques. Right? They emerged through understanding what the techniques were pointing toward. Right? Anybody that has the book that I wrote, what the hell is it called, James? The Ninja Combat Matrix, right? I confused some people in there because I referenced the this ability to see this aspect at higher levels, right? In that book, I matched the lineages to situations that you don't see at the beginner levels. Okay. And this is no different than scrolls, right? Scroll levels, this illusion of mastery, right? Shoden, Chuden, Okuden, right? That kind of thing. Without understanding the purpose of each scroll level, training can start to look like more kata equals higher mastery, right? But scrolls are not ladders of complexity. They're lenses of perception, right? Same kata changes meaning depending on how you see it, which filter you're running it through. Okay? So a good student doesn't chase more forms, right? They deepen how they read the same form. So what does being a good student actually look like in this context? Here are just a few things to get you started. Right? Train as if you're always being taught. Receive first, interpret later. If you can't do the moves consistently without thinking about them, you're not ready for the next thing yet. Protect the model before you personalize it. Seek correction, not validation. Some people know this, most don't. When I go to Japan, I collect no's, as in no, that's not right. No, it's this way. Right? I collect no's, not praises. I'm not spending that amount of money to go to Japan and be told how great I am. Why bother to leave home? Okay. Next, expand your lens without losing your anchor. Treat etiquette as a training tool, not social hierarchy. And remember, rank marks responsibility, not completion. Okay. What this comes down to is whether someone chooses a teacher or not, the level of guidance that they seek and the type of student they become are all created. They all create downstream consequences. Okay? It's cause and effect, cause and consequences. It's the law of the universe, right? No judgment, no right or wrong. But different paths lead to different capabilities, lead to a different level and type of understanding. That's not hierarchy. It's cause and effect. Okay. So I'll leave you with the same question Natsumi Sensei posed through that metaphor of the stars, but I'm going to flip it. Okay. The question is, what kind of student are you? Are you collecting information, or are you allowing yourself to be shaped by the path? Because in the end, the art isn't determined by how many techniques you know. It's determined by how deeply you allow yourself to see. Right. Before we wrap this up, don't forget, going to Japan in May. Details finalized soon, but 8 spots, 4 are gone. Anyway, James, last minute or last chance, last call. Questions, comments, complaints? I mean, you can toss some in too if you have some.
The only thing I see is Alan says he's already booked space for his comfy chair.
See that look? Anyway, for those of you on audio only, no, you can't see the look. Anyway, I did tell Alan that based on somebody that went to Japan before, that person has already made Alan look like royalty. So don't screw it up. Anyway, that's it. That's all.
That's it.
Wow. Alan had the last word. Of course, it's not difficult to have the last word if you had the only word. All right. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. James, anything that you think I forgot? If you could quickly toss the link in for the Ninja Combat Matrix, just in case anybody doesn't have it, and it becomes a part of the comments on the different platforms, I'd appreciate it. All right. But I guess people could get a sneak peek on the Japan trip thing. It's just at onlineninjaacademy.com/Japan-trip. The buttons aren't active and it's not locked in yet, but it will be tonight, unless those damn Koga Ninja screw with my hardware again. Anyway, that's it. Nothing else.
That's it. Well, Gregory Leonard said thank you for the training.
You're welcome. Thanks for being on. Appreciate it. Thanks for the support. Okay, going to go ahead and wrap this up. I will talk to everybody again next time. Be safe, train hard. See you next time on KUDEN. Get more of KUDEN Radio. Subscribe through your favorite podcasting site or join our clan of serious modern warriors at onlineninjaacademy.com.